Hey guys, welcome back to Mr. Gabriel's Auto Talk. And so, since we're down to the last 2 weeks of school, I thought that it would be a great opportunity for you guys to submit your questions to me, and that way I can answer anything you want to ask. You know, of course, I've been asking you guys questions the last few months doing this online Google stuff, and so I figured it'd be a good chance to give you guys an opportunity to ask me something. So I'm probably going to break this video up into two parts. So we'll do one part today, and then I'll make another recording for tomorrow so you don't have so much to watch. But anyway, I printed your questions off here. So we're just going to start at the top. And so Andrew asked, how exactly does a turbo power engine work? And I think what he meant was, how does a turbo make more power? Of course, he wasn't the only one that asked that. He asked about the turbo, and I think Bryson had a question. Gabriel had a question. How does a turbo work? Why does it increase the horsepower to a car? And then, like I said, I think Bryson asked kind of the same thing. He was asking, though, why is a single turbo sometimes better than a twin turbo? So I'm going to cover a couple different answers in that same question, because Brian Puentes had asked about a camshaft. All of this goes in together. So let's start with this. An engine, and I don't care if it's in a lawnmower, in this big block Chevelle, in my little hot rod, in whatever you're driving, it doesn't matter. An engine is nothing more than a big air pump. It doesn't matter if it's a diesel, gas, 4-stroke, 2-stroke, doesn't matter. They're all one big air pump. So what we're doing is we have to have these air pumps, these engines, pull in air and fuel and make power depending on what it is, right? So think of the engine as like your lungs. The bigger your lungs, the more air you can take in, the more oxygen you can take in. So same thing with this. If you've got this 396 Chevelle, it's going to make more power than a little 4-cylinder engine's going to make. And that 4-cylinder engine's going to make more power than the little Briggs & Stratton lawnmower you got. So let's talk about the air pump, the engine, okay? Anything that we can do to that engine to take more air in, we're going to make more power. So if we start talking about turbochargers, that's what a turbocharger does. Whether you're talking about a turbocharger, a supercharger, nitrous oxide, camshafts, all of those things that I just mentioned, they're all what we call power adders to help make more power. So let's talk about the turbo, since that's been the biggest thing people's asked about. Okay, so the turbo, if you look at it, it looks like a snail. Kind of, if you look at it from the front, kind of looks like a snail. Now, what it is it has two turbines to it. There's a turbine on one side and a turbine on the other side. Now, you figure that on the engine that it's mounted on, that engine, like I said, whether it's a lawnmower, Chevelle, my hot rod, your car, doesn't matter. We're all going to make exhaust, because once we burn the air and fuel, we're going to make exhaust. So the turbo uses that exhaust to spin one side of that turbine. So the exhaust that your engine's making anyway, we're going to take and we're going to plumb it. Instead of plumbing it out the back of the car, we're going to make some tubes on the exhaust. And we're going to run the tubes to one side of that turbine on that turbo. So now when the engine's making power and you're making exhaust, the exhaust is going to get plumbed to that turbine, and it's going to spin that turbine, right? It's no different than you blowing on one of those little turbines you buy at the Dollar General. That's what we're doing. We're taking the exhaust, we're going to plumb it to that. It's going to spin that turbine on. Now that rotor is attached to a turbine on the other side, and that's what you guys see. Like if you watch Street Outlaws, that's what you guys see at the front of that car. You're seeing the front side of that turbo. Now that turbine, since we're spinning it, it's scooping air in, and we're going to take that air that it scooped in and we're going to plumb it with some piping, and we're going to plumb it into the motor. So now, as that engine makes power and makes exhaust, that exhaust spins the turbo spins and sucks more air in, forces it into the engine. Now, with an engine management system, a computer, what we can do is, now that we got more air coming in, we can dump more fuel with the more air that we got, and that's how it makes more power. So now going back to what Bryson was talking about, the difference between running 2 turbos or running a single turbo, a lot of it depends on a lot of different factors. That could be a trick question because there's no one good answer for everybody's situation. Let me give you just a little bit of history without getting too much out of proportion that you don't understand what I'm talking about. If you got a small turbo, a smaller turbo, okay, if you drive around at lower RPMs, like take off from a light or something like that, the smaller turbo is going to do better because it's not going to have as much lag time as what a larger turbo would have. A bigger turbo is going to have more lag time. So that's why when you watch the drag racing on TV, especially like a Pro Mod or those Street Outlaws, you'll hear those guys use terms like spooling up, building boost. Well, what they're talking about is those guys are running these big turbos. I mean, an 88 millimeter turbo is small for them. Some of these guys are running 102, 106 millimeter turbos. They might be running 2 of those. But these guys have big motors too. You know, some of these guys are running 5, 6, 7, 800 cubic inch motors. That's a big motor. That's a big air pump, big set of lungs. Takes a lot to feed it. So, but what they have to do before they leave the line is they got to run them RPMs up. They're running the RPMs up on the engine, which is making more exhaust, and it's spinning the turbo faster. It's getting that turbo up to where it's building more boost. And a lot of times they'll look at their boost gauge because they know what boost they want to leave at. And of course they can use their engine management system to control that boost. So those guys that, you know, see them, they have a pop-off valve that pops off the excess pressure that they don't want to use, and of course they can set that, dial it in for whatever they want. And everybody's tune might be different. Somebody might use 38 pounds of boost. Somebody else might use 50 pounds of boost, 40 pounds of boost. So whatever they think they can put to the ground. All the horsepower in the world don't do you any good if you can't get it to the pavement. That's why some of them, if they're not very good tuners, they blow the tires right off of it, right off the line. So to answer that question, just know that a turbo just pushes more air into the engine. Supercharger does the same thing, but here's the biggest difference. A supercharger being driven off the crankshaft with a belt, it takes power to make power. We're going to take power away from the engine to spin the supercharger to suck more air in. That's what a supercharger is doing. The belt is driving a pulley and it's spinning a set of screws or a set of roots, and of course they rotate like this back around and they're sucking air in. As they suck air in, we can dump more fuel, and of course that fuel is what we want. That fuel is what makes power. That goes back to nitrous oxide. How does nitrous oxide make more power? Well, same thing. For you guys that remember learning this in science class, nitrous oxide is N2O, so that's 2 parts of nitrogen, which we don't care nothing about. It's the oxygen that we want. It's that 1 part of oxygen because that's pure oxygen. That's what makes the power, is that oxygen, because now we're injecting straight oxygen into that motor. We can inject more fuel with it and make more power. The more fuel you can burn, the more power you're going to make. So Brian asked the question about a camshaft. How does a camshaft make more power? Goes right back to what I was talking about on the air pump. A camshaft, there's certain terms that we use. We use a term called lift. We use a term called duration. And then there's another one you'll see about valve overlap. So lift is exactly what it sounds like. It's how much it lifts the valve open out of the head. The further we lift the valve open, then the more air and fuel can flow into the motor and we make more power. The duration is just like it sounds like. That's duration. That's how long it stays open. So the longer the valve can stay open, then the more air and fuel we can get in. But we can only be open so long because eventually the valve has to shut and the exhaust valve has to open up to let it out. That gets into when we start talking about valve overlap. That's where the two overlap each other. Of course, a racing cam profile will have the overlap closer together. A stock cam will have them further apart because there's benefits, there's pros and cons to both. You can have a race engine, but it's designed to do one thing. It's designed to go as fast as it can go in a short amount of time, shut it off. We don't care about gas mileage. We don't care about drivability. It's just wide open or closed throttle, nothing in between. So for a street car, that camshaft doesn't work. But for a street cam, you need engine vacuum for your brakes. You need drivability. You're looking for some fuel mileage. So that's why when you pick a camshaft, you've got to really look at how you're going to drive the car, and don't pick a race cam, because unless you're racing, you're not going to be happy with it, and it's not going to be very pleasant. But anyway, so hopefully that answers your question, several questions, how the turbo works, how does it make more power, and of course, you know, we can spool them up, make different pounds of boost, and we can control that. Of course, that answers the questions about the camshaft as well. And that should answer the question about the nitrous oxide. All of those things, when you put that on an engine, requires more fuel. Anytime you do a supercharger, turbocharger, nitrous oxide, we have to add more fuel so that it'll work right and it'll make more power. Now, David Castillo asked a question that'll kind of tie in with this. He asked about if those chips that you can buy for your car, or the programmers, if they'll damage your motor. The answer to that is no, they will not. I repeat, they will not damage your motor. But for you to get the benefit of those tuners, those chips, or those programs, those tuner programs you can put in your car, for you to get the benefit of that, you need to run better fuel. And when I say better fuel, I mean higher octane fuel. Because you got to realize that the manufacturers, when they design that car and the programmers put that program into the PCM, they're looking at the average driver. They're looking at fuel mileage, power, the drivability of it, you know, not a choppy idle, none of that. They're trying to give everybody a smooth idle, decent gas mileage, decent power. But for you as an enthusiast, if you're a car enthusiast, you really, fuel mileage is probably not important to you. You're worried about more power. So that's what those chips will do. They'll bump your timing up. They'll give you more advance on your timing. And of course, they'll increase the fuel. They'll give you more fuel to make the most power. An engine will always run better a little bit rich. You don't ever want to run an engine lean. And we talked about this in class, that 14.7 to 1 is the perfect ratio, and you need to be right on the edge of that ratio. 14.7 to 1, 15 to 1, and what we're talking about is we're talking about parts of air to fuel. If I say 14.7 to 1, I mean there's 14.7 parts of air to 1 part of fuel. And so that turbo is going to add more air, which means we can add more fuel. Supercharger, got to add more air, we can add more fuel. Nitrous oxide, we're going to add more oxygen, air, oxygen, more fuel. We're going to make more power. Your tuner is going to do the same thing. We're going to add more fuel to give you the most amount of power, and we're going to give you more timing as well. But to get the benefit of it, you're going to have to do your part and run better fuel, because the programmers, the manufacturers, they already know that people are probably going to run the cheapest gas they can get, which will be 87 octane, which is a pretty low octane. So therefore, they have to back the timing down. They have to adjust the fuel curve to it. And so when you put that tuner in there, they'll bump the timing up for you. They'll increase more fuel being dumped. Your fuel trim tables are going to change, and it'll be much, much better. But you got to do your part. Don't put a tuner in there and then just put the cheapest gas you can find. You won't like it. You probably won't see any benefit at all. So if you're going to put a tuner or a chip in there, then put the better gas and drive it, and you'll find that you really like it. But to answer your question, David, no, it will not damage the motor. No kind, no way. Okay, so I'm up to about 15 minutes on this video. I'm going to cover one more question, and then I'll cover the other questions tomorrow. So Kevin Lopez had a question about synthetic oil. And let me tell you, when it comes to engine oil, opinions is 9 times out of 10 what you're going to hear. So what I'm going to tell you is my opinion on it. Synthetic engine oil is exactly what they say it is. It is good motor oil. It's very good, and it does have a good wear quality. But here's where the problem comes in. People that buy synthetic oil think that they can just go 10 to 15,000 miles in between oil changes. And me and my, really 40 years experience, that's never a good thing for an engine. I try to explain it to people. I use the analogy, it's like this. Let's say I'm advertising this super high-end grade toothpaste, right? It's $100 a tube. This is the best toothpaste money can buy. And I'm telling you that if you buy this toothpaste, you only have to brush your teeth 3 times a year. That's all you got to do, because this toothpaste is the best money can buy. Okay, well, you're not changing your eating habits any. You're still eating 3 square meals a day. You're still snacking on candy. You're still drinking Cokes. You've got that sugared up tea that you're drinking. So do you really think that your teeth are going to last just as long brushing them 3 times a year because you're using this high dollar toothpaste? Well, that's kind of the analogy that these oil manufacturers are shoving down your throat with this synthetic oil. I'm here to tell you that that engine could care less what motor oil's in there, because what turns your motor oil dark is not the engine wearing anyway. It's the dirty air that gets past your air filter that gets sucked into the motor. It's the dirty fuel that you get at the gas pump. It's just the normal process of burning of that fuel. You've got excess carbons that don't get burned, and they get trapped in the engine oil, and that's the engine oil's job. Its job is to trap those particles. And of course, any larger particles that are up into the micron spectrum get trapped in the oil filter, and that becomes a problem too. If you go too long in between your oil changes, you're changing that filter every 10, 15,000 miles, you're expecting that filter to trap a lot of dirt, and it can only trap so much, and then it just can't trap anymore, and the rest of the trash is just going to get cycled through the engine, and now you're just running that trashy oil through your engine that much longer. So my best advice, what I do personally, what I tell people when they ask me about it is, I would much rather see you run a cheaper conventional oil, and I don't mean cheap oil. I mean, use a Castrol or a Valvoline or, Rotella. Use a good brand oil, but conventional oil. Use that and change it more often. I would much rather see somebody change their oil every 3,000 to 5,000 miles because, just like the analogy with brushing your teeth, even if you use the cheapest toothpaste they got out there and you brush your teeth like they tell you to after every meal 3 times a day, which most of us don't do that. We brush them in the morning, we brush them at night. But even at that, you're supposed to brush them 3 times a day. You're removing the food that gets trapped in your teeth. You're removing that every time you brush it, and you're not letting that food sit there and rot your teeth. So that $100 tube of toothpaste is not going to save your teeth. It ain't about what the cost of that is. It's about the fact that you're getting rid of the trash. Same thing with the engine oil. Get rid of that trash, get it out of your motor, put some fresh oil back in it, and now your engine will last longer. And this isn't just an opinion, it's a fact because I've seen it. I used to take care of these limo cars back when I worked for Ford, and so I watched these guys put sometimes 1,000 miles a day on these limo service cars, driving people in and out of Love Field and DFW. And so I've seen what can happen if you change the oil, 3 to 5,000 miles religiously. Now, this is from the time that the car was new. If you buy a used car and it's got, 60, 70, 80,000 miles on it, whatever damage is done is done. There's nothing you can do about it. I would still change them all every 5,000 miles, but I can't guarantee anything. But I know these Lincolns that they use for limo cars, executive cars, I took care of them from the time they were new. Most of the cars, not all of them, but most all of them got sold with no engine work. Some of these cars were sold with 250,000 miles. We had a couple of them that were just extremely good cars, and they didn't get rid of them cars until they had 500,000 miles on them. Never anything ever done to the engines to them. Now, we did transmissions and rear ends like nobody's business, but the engines never were got into. So I know for a fact that changing the oil sooner does better. And I also had an experience, this will be my last story for today. I had two customers of mine. They didn't know each other, but about the same time, they both bought new BMWs. One of them bought a 750 IL, which was an expensive car back then, and the other one bought an X5. Both of these were brand new BMWs. Now, back then, BMW was pushing Castrol. That was what was on the oil cap, and they were pushing synthetic oil. And so this question came up with both customers asking me about it, and I told them both the same thing I just told you guys. The guy with the 750 IL didn't listen to me. He went ahead and did what BMW told him to do. He bought the synthetic oil. He changed the oil every 15,000 miles, so he says. The other guy listened to what I said because I took care of his car, and me and him changed the oil. I did use Castrol, but not synthetic, and I changed his oil about every 5,000 miles. The guy with the X5 drove it up to 5 years, traded it in on a new Lincoln, and never had any problems with the engine at all. Engine was fine. The guy with the 750 IL, as soon as his powertrain warranty went out, the engine shelled. What happened was the plastic on the timing chain guides, the plastic got wore off, and the timing chain ate into the aluminum of the guide and just sent that aluminum through the whole engine and ruined it. So the guy with the 750 IL couldn't get any help from BMW because it was out of powertrain warranty. Even though he had done what they told him to do, didn't matter. They didn't help him any. He ended up buying an $11,000 repair bill to have the engine redone, rebuilt, just so he could get rid of the car. And he didn't even make it as many miles as a guy with the X5. So I've had plenty of experiences both ways, and I'm here to tell you, I personally wouldn't waste my money on this synthetic oil. Buy a regular conventional oil, change it every 3,000 to 5,000 miles, and you'll be fine. So anyway, that's it for today, guys. Stay tuned tomorrow, and I'll answer the rest of your questions. Thanks. Bye.